Robert Litwak is Vice President for Scholars and Director of International Security Studies at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. He joins us to discuss his latest work, Deterring Nuclear Terrorism. Rob, welcome and congratulations on another nice piece of work.
Thank you, John.
It's been really interesting over the years to talk to you as your thinking has progressed on these issues. And it took me back to sort of the carefree days of the Cold War, as the joke goes, where deterrence meant something different than what we're talking about today. Could you talk about sort of the evolution of the kind of state deterrence that we talked about in that era doesn't really apply to these actors?
Well, when the Cold War ended, the conventional wisdom was that the risk of nuclear war between great powers had declined, but that the risk that a single nuclear weapon might be used by a terrorist had gone up. And that was really the starting point of my interest in this topic. As you know, my research is focused on states. I worked on the so-called rogue states and the outlier states, and this book is an extension of that, in that when President Obama warns that a terrorist group is determined to buy, steal, or build a nuclear weapon, if they were to obtain the material, the weapon or the material, it would come from a state. I mean, Al-Qaeda does not have its own uranium enrichment program. There are 9 states with nuclear weapons. There are 24 states that have weapons usable fissile material, weapons grade material. And either the weapon or the material would come from a state. So that if we adopt effective state-based strategies, it doesn't solve this non-state problem, but it gets us quite a ways there.
Given that reality, have we taken our eye off the ball, so to speak? Is our focus too much on the non-state actors?
I think that both have been the focus of attention. Of course, the rogue states, Iran, Iraq, North Korea, Libya, were the focus of intense tension and in one case, a preventive war in 2003. And after 9/11, it's really the conjunction of the two that I've been focusing on. Because after 9/11, the international system did not change, but there was a redefinition of threat focused on the nexus of proliferation and terrorism. The possibility that a rogue state might transfer a nuclear weapon to an undeterrable terrorist group like Al-Qaeda. These states, North Korea, Iran, they constitute regional threats, but they are also countries of concern with respect to terrorist acquisition of nuclear weapons. There are 2 major routes by which a terrorist group would acquire a weapon or materials. Either they would steal it, so-called leakage as the experts call it, and there the countries of concern are Russia and Pakistan, or it would be transferred. And here the country of primary concern is North Korea, which has a reputation of selling anything to anyone.
So for instance, China, as a neighbor of North Korea, are they as concerned about this as the United States is?
Yes, and let me just loop back to your point about the Cold War, is that during the Cold War, our conventional thinking about deterrence is the distinction in the analytical community they make between deterrence by punishment or deterrence by denial. Much of the Cold War deterrence was deterrence by punishment, that a threat that if the Soviet Union attacked the United States in turn would retaliate against the Soviet Union, and there was sort of mutual assured destruction was the quintessential form of this type of deterrence by punishment. What we're talking about primarily with respect to the non-state threat and the risk of acquisition is deterrence by denial. Namely, if we lock down the weapons, if we lock down the materials, you're not deterring by a threat of punishment Al-Qaeda, but you're deterring them because you're just saying, you're taking pragmatic steps to say you won't have access to these materials. You can't get access to this weapon.
So non-proliferation remains the key concept here, keeping what exists already in safekeeping.
Well, in the broader proliferation optic, it's not all bad news. I mean, in 1962, President Kennedy famously predicted a world of 35 nuclear weapon states. We don't live in that world. And the reason is that most states don't believe they need nuclear weapons to address their security concerns, their alliances, the nuclear umbrella, etc. That's the good news. But there are 9 states, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, the United States, Russia, China, Britain, France, that are nuclear weapon states recognized by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. 3 states that are outside the NPT, India, Pakistan, and as widely acknowledged, Israel. it's an undeclared but acknowledged nuclear weapon state, and now North Korea. And we just had intense diplomacy focused on Iran, which came to fruition through the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in July 2015, which, if successfully implemented, will block Iran's access to either a nuclear weapon or weapons usable material for 15 years.
You've been at this a long time. You've written about it in ways where we've gotten to see the evolution of your thinking. Where you're sitting right now, when you look at the entire landscape, not just the United States, are we doing enough? I mean, there are no sure bets in these issues, right? In these types of affairs, right? Somebody could find a way with ill intent. But are we doing everything that's reasonable?
I think 2 points. One, you distinguish between weapons, actual
weapons ready
actual
to
weapon
explode,
that either would be stolen or bought, or much more difficult built by a terrorist group, and there's debate whether that's within or outside the technical command of a terrorist group. And then you have dirty bombs, okay, which are radioactive materials in commercial use that a terrorist group could wrap an explosive around and detonate. On the weapons side, the deterrence by denial strategies that I outline in the book of locking down materials, securing weapons usable materials, and locking down and securing weapons, that will take us quite far in blocking terrorist acquisition of a weapon or weapons grade fissile material. The dirty bomb is much more difficult because of just the ubiquitous application of radioactive use of pervasive use of radioactive materials in our commercial economy, medical isotopes, etc. And there, I think I discuss in the book, public education can go far, because people will hear, oh, nuclear weapons been detonated in the city. Well, it would be a dirty bomb, and the fatalities would come from the blast effects of the weapon. The radioactive consequences are much less than that of an actual weapon. There might be an uptick in cancer, for people exposed to it, but it doesn't have the catastrophic consequence. And that's why a dirty bomb has been called not a weapon of mass destruction, but a weapon of mass disruption, because it would be economic and psychological. People would hear radioactive and head for the hills. So I think that some public education, because that's the most, it's less consequential but more probable, and governments should educate their public so that if one of these devices, we hope not, is detonated, that the public would know, put it in perspective.
Yeah. Well, Rob, thank you for helping us keep all of this in perspective. These are very challenging issues. And for those of you who would like to read Rob's latest work, Deterring Nuclear Terrorism, it's available if you come to the Wilson Center website, and you can download a PDF version free of charge. And hope you'll do that. Rob, thanks again.
Thank you, John.
Terrorists getting their hands on a weapon of mass destruction, and if they ever got hold of a nuclear weapon or nuclear material, we have no doubt they'd use it.
If a terrorist group would acquire a nuclear weapon, it would come from a state. States of primary concern are Russia, Pakistan, North Korea, and Iran. The Islamic State is a non-state terrorist organization, which we say is neither Islamic nor a state, but its occupation of territory in Iraq and Syria confer to it the technological capabilities of a state that pose a direct threat to us.